the doctor.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Mary Lynn. Thank everyone for coming. 6 years ago, I refused to give an approval to a physician that I trained with and had known for 30 years. We both have kids as juniors in the same high school. And so I know a lot about skepticism. Western medicine makes you skeptic. It's hard to believe that a substance can provide as much benefit as cannabis does, so you tend to kind of just discount it because it's crazy talk. At this point, I lecture around the world on raw cannabis. This video is being taken from Luxembourg, where there's about 18 acres of cannabis. And as we move to the provision of 7 billion 1-gram doses of cannabinoids a day, we're going to have to rethink how we make this plant. We can't grow it with high-pressure sodiums. We're going to need to look at it. It is a vegetable. For 34 million years, every animal has used it as a raw vegetable, as did we until Prometheus gave us the ability to chemically alter the plant. In the raw plant, there's very little THC, so little that you can eat mature flower, and it's not psychoactive. And since it's not psychoactive, it does not become psychotoxic. When it's not psychotoxic, your dose can go from a THC dose of 10 milligrams up to a dose of 600 to 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams, very similar to vitamin C. And the federal government compares those two molecules in its patent. We're in the middle of a really big thing. Global spring means we got to get the planet together to save the planet, or our children are going to have a really rough time in 40 or 50 years. CO2 production, we put 31 billion tons into the atmosphere. Permafrost is thawing. It's releasing incredible amounts of methane, which trap 19 times more CO2, or more heat than CO2. And we know that in World War II, they did the Hemp for Victory, and they asked American farmers to put in hundreds of thousands of acres. It's time for Hemp for Victory 2. We need millions of acres. Currently working on a strain called CCS, Carbon Capture and Storage. A CCS strain could provide us with leaf and flower that could run 10, 20+% CBD, providing us with a dietary source of cannabidiolic acid. At the same time, that fiber could be pressed into lumber, plywood, insulation, and hempcrete, allow trees to stand. So hemp really has, we all know it has lots of benefits. We need to stop talking about those benefits. And I'll sneak in one quick plug here, which is one reason that I'm running for United States Congress is that I think we need a cannabinoid scientist there to kind of inform some policy. Thank you. This last month, Obama signed an Emergency Preparedness Act, identifies essential civilian demand, and I would like each and every one of you to totally understand that phrase. And in that document, it identifies hemp as a strategic resource. So how is it that we say that the climate change is an emergency for which we would like to prepare and would like to invoke our right to use hemp to fix CO2? So when we use hemp to make fuel, you capture 20 carbon molecules, CO2 molecules, and you make an oil. You burn the oil and you produce 20 carbon molecules. So it's a closed system. You're not putting tons and tons and tons of CO2 in the atmosphere that we're extracting from the ground. And the problem with CO2, we've got all these coal plants. We've got 100 years of coal plants that we can't afford to fix. We're the only country in the world that hasn't really lived up to its responsibility because we can't afford it. It goes to the $15 trillion debt. We got a lot of big problems in a lot of areas. But the way we shut those coal plants down is we move into hydrokinetic, and I'm diverging here. We're going to get right back. But hemp is a very valuable product, and it's essential because it doesn't really matter that hemp can cure cancer, that hemp can reduce the size of heart attacks by 66%, that hemp can reduce insulin-dependent diabetes by 58%. It doesn't matter if the climate falls apart, and it's falling apart. I mean, we're at 394 parts per million last month. Last previous high in the last 500 million years was 280. So changes are coming. We need to figure out how we're going to respond. I said I was going to switch tracks, but one last comment. This is from the Field Museum in Chicago. It says we're losing 4 species an hour. That is a very low estimate. This is the Anthropocene epoch. The humans are beginning to impact the atmosphere and the planet, and it has not been a good contribution. Normal rate of loss is 1 species for every 4 years. We're now losing, it says here, 4 an hour. It actually runs up to 150 to 500,000 species are being lost each and every 4-year period when we normally lose only 1. The last mass extinction, the 5th, the dinosaurs went down with 17% of the species. They're predicting that we're going to lose 50%, 3 times as severe as the event that took out the dinosaurs. So we're having an impact. We need to open our minds, and we need to make that part of our hemp plan, because this is one plant that can really step in and provide us with many benefits. Wiser Earth. Wiser is an organization, is like a Facebook, a very interesting place. There are organizations all over the world. There are hundreds of thousands of groups. Save the Amazon, Save Patagonia, Protect the Glaciers. Be aware of this group, because this is the group of people that we're going to have the most elements in common, and we're going to need to work together to, 1, provide cannabis as a dietary essential and hemp as a way to manage the climate crisis. Because at this point we can stop adding and we can begin to extract, and we need to go into the active mode of capture. We have a lot of plants coal plants that capture CO2, but you take that CO2 and you put it into an oil well to pump the oil out, and then that well belches CO2 back, and we asphyxiated 1,700 people. It's hard to handle tons and tons and billions of tons of gas. So we need to move away from that metaphor. Hemp is a clear path forward. We have an essential civilian demand. We must exercise that. It's a pretty picture. You just got to love pictures of receptors and modeling. There was a woman who at Icarus did a 3-dimensional modeling, and we now know that the orthosteric receptor faces into the lipid layer, so that the ligands, the active messenger molecules, dissolve into the membrane, attach to that receptor, and do all their downstream signaling. And it turns out that TRPV is a site of action of the cannabinoid acids. And it's important to know that in this plant, the cannabinoids are almost all present as acids. CBD acid, CBC acid, THC acid, and those have a lot of different properties than the neutrals. It's true we've studied CBD and CBG and CBC and THC for 30 years and 10,000 articles, but those are all synthetic molecules that really are not found in this plant, and we should not call the plant or equate the plant with a neutral cannabinoid, because there's not enough of them present to affect the kind of actions that we refer to. So we take the plant, we chemically alter it, and then we study those chemicals, and that's really different than what cannabis provides. The last speaker was talking about the CBD issue, and this is from Marijuana Chemistry, where they said that the CBD content of marijuana and hashish should be as low as possible in order to get a good high. A high THC content only means a good high if accompanied by a low CBD content. It restates it 4 times. Any grass containing lots of CBD should be extracted, and the CBD isomerize the THC. And then this book goes on to carefully evaluate the ratios of THC and CBD in plants all over the world, all over the country, different parts of the plant. It's a very important document, but it set the groundwork in the 1970s that what we're trying to do is get rid of CBD because it's messing with the plant, and we've been very effective at that. But what we got rid of, you saw in the previous presentation, or one of them, is some fairly phenomenal benefits. So we have this CBD molecule, which is important. If you learned one thing today, that the neutrals are not really found in the plant, and we'll get to a graph of that later if we have time. It's the acids, and with CBD acid, we now know that that attaches at GPR55, known as the orphan receptor, because for 15 years we didn't know what attached to it. We tried CBD, we tried THC, we tried the synthetics, and they didn't attach there. So it was called the orphan receptor until Ruth Ross tried CBG acid and CBD acid, and lo and behold, 200 to 400% more effective. The only things that really act, and it's a pro-inflammatory site, they're antagonists, so it produces a net anti-inflammatory effect. All to say that as we switch over, keep your ears tuned to the difference between the raw plant with its acids and then the heated plant with its neutral molecules. We're trying to just connect this with the clinical practice. I have a series of children. One of my patient's father is here, and this stuff is really hard on me. I can't imagine how it is on him. Yeah. His child had multiple seizures, hundreds of seizures, major grand mals, petit mals, myoclonic seizures called Dravet's, and had been on every medicine that Western medicine could offer, and without a lot of relief. And then a strain came back from Spain, and we're beginning to find strains in which the amount of CBD and CBD acid are much elevated. And he went from a strain in which it was 2-to-1 that did not provide a lot of relief, and he went to a strain in which it was 3-to-1 and there was some relief, and he has recently gone to a 12-to-1 strain, and with 12% weight-to-weight CBD or CBD acid to 1% THC, this child who used to have hundreds of seizures a day is now going days without a seizure. Yes. Nope. So this is the federal patent they were talking about earlier, cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants, 2003 research done in Bethesda, Maryland, intellectual property of the United States of America, which arrests 850,000 people a year for cannabis. An important document, in my mind, probably the single most important document pretty much in all the literature in this area, because it educates us about what an antioxidant is, how it acts, what reactive oxygen species are, the things that we produce that damage our membranes, and it also lists these oxidative associated diseases, which this was highlighted as a chart for a legal presentation, so I selected items that were relevant to that case. But if you start out with ischemia and ischemic reperfusion injury, there's a woman in Israel who says you take 2 mice and you feed them an excellent diet and give one of them 5 milligrams per kilogram CBD, and then you tie off the artery to the heart and do some heart attack. The heart attack in the individual that's consuming 5 milligrams per kilogram a day, the heart attack is 66% smaller. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 cause of death in every man and woman in the United States. $200 billion. And when you add cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes, you equal the military budget. Over $600 billion is spent on those 4 diseases, and this plant has tremendous capacity for all of those. If you came out with a drug called Protec, and you said, we can reduce the size of the heart attack by 66%, you would be a billionaire. It'd be blockbuster. It would make Viagra look like aspirin. And diabetes, we know that it can reduce insulin-dependent diabetes by 58%, and I think there's $70 billion spent on that. On cancer, there's $230 or $40 billion spent. And another one of my patients who's 2 or 3 had a brainstem tumor, picked up 4 Brags, shipped to Children's Hospital, spent a whole year on the pediatric oncology ward. Had a stent placed, 24 hours of surgery the first week. That's 3 neurosurgeons operating 8 hours apiece back to back. That's serious table time. And then the tumor grew back, and so they knew they had a big problem in their hands. They went to chemotherapy, and they went to the strongest that they could give this child, 10 times lethal. Totally destroyed her bone marrow, means she had to have a bone marrow transplant. The tumor grew back. And then the tumor began to wrap around her optic nerve, so they did another 15 hours on the table, cutting this off of her optic nerve. Every time they do this, she loses the ability to walk. So the tumor grew back again, and then they took her out of the Children's Hospital because she needed the strongest radiation you could get, and they didn't have it in that facility. Put her under general anesthesia every morning for 42 days and irradiated her brainstem. And then the next MRI showed that the tumor was back. So they put her on morphine and oxygen and sent her home to Fort Bragg on hospice. And the local pediatrician, they do these interviews. I've had like 5 or 6 of them, and so it's pretty saturated up there with this raw cannabis stuff. So the pediatrician says, well, you might as well try raw cannabis. You know, the worst you can do is get high, and I don't think that's possible. So this child went home to Kamshi, and this came home in June. June, July is when the leaf peaks in its chemotype development and accumulation. And this child had access to bags of fresh leaf, and she was juicing by first account up to 8 ounces, so somewhere between 4 and 8 ounces of raw juice a day. Did that for a couple of weeks, slept for a couple of weeks. Her first MRI came. Well, going back a little bit, the hospice worker doesn't like to hang over the family and call them every day and says, you know, is the baby alive? Are you, do you need me to come? Should we call a morgue or something? And the family just never called the hospice worker. And the hospice worker got pretty anxious. She said she wasn't going to call and bother them, but she finally did after about 2 months. You know, is the child stuffed or buried there? I mean, what's going on? It's Kamshi, things happen out there. And they called up, and the parents said, oh, baby's fine. And baby's fine? What do you mean the baby's fine? You know, are you guys doing all the morphine yourself? I mean, what is actually going on? And so they invited this hospice worker out, and she comes out there, and this baby's sitting on a kitchen table eating a cheese sandwich. And the hospice worker, well, this child was, you know, they thought she'd be dead in 10 to 14 days, and here it is a couple of months, and she's looking pretty healthy. And they said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm giving her juice. I said, yeah, that's cool. What kind of juice you giving her? And the hospice worker hadn't heard about it. And now that child has just passed like 4 or 5 MRIs. She's 2 years out. The last MRI, not only is the tumor gone, but the radiation damage, the scar tissue has completely reabsorbed in about 1.5 years, and it normally takes 5 to 6 years to reabsorb that scar tissue. And the radiologist is like 42 days maximum dose radiation, and the scar tissue's gone. So the list here of conditions, we see neoplasia. So that's on the list, and that's $240 billion. It lists diabetes, autoimmune disorders. I mean, this is a plant that can help us deal with $15 trillion of debt and Medicare that is going to go bankrupt if the Affordable Care Act is overturned by the Supreme Court 5-4, the same way they installed Bush and the same way that they gave us Citizens United and overturned term limits. If we lose affordable care, then bankruptcy is going to strike Medicare, and things are going to go downhill. And this whole congressional run thing has just been a nightmare. I mean, I don't know why I did that. It's, you know, we're going to try to take $600 billion out of domestic this year. We're complaining about loss of services. You know, they got to cut another 1.2 trillion, and that's of 5 trillion. The 1.2 is the low-hanging fruit, and the best minds in Senate and Congress could not even get together and look at each other. They didn't even meet, and they were challenged to kind of do something with that. And so this could be a rough year. This would be a real good time to grow a little cannabis in your backyard. So the Western medical physician, and I was, you know, 95th percentile in national boards. You know, I studied too much. I remember that, you know, I've always been anxious about performance, so kind of went pretty crazy in my first year of medical school. And the school I went to, they kept a full annual anatomy test. A lot of places will test you on 3 months worth of systems. You take that test and you're done. Well, this old school I went to, they tested you on the whole body. And I went into that test, and I ended up, it was humorous, because I was grading the questions, you know, how much energy they put into making it tricky, you know, and there's some that were really challenging and some that were not. And, you know, so I ranked the test. And so when I came out of there, I was a Western medical doctor. I was all about the silver bullet approach to life. You want a single effect. You want, penicillin stops the production of the cell wall, which is found in the bacteria, that stops pneumonia. That was the metaphor. That metaphor has dominated Western medicine. That metaphor has diarrhea when it looks at a map like this, because it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible for something to do this. And it really is, it causes problems in terms of moving forward. I mean, they don't know how to teach it in medical schools, so they don't. I talked to a resident just got out, never heard of the endogenous cannabinoid system. This system provides feedback modulation to all 210 cell types, of which there are 70 to 100 trillion cells. And if you keep the cell healthy, you don't have disease. And the federal patent, if you go, the first time you read the federal patent, just highlight prevention and prophylaxis. How many times it talks about prevention? And why are we not teaching this in medical school and providing, just focused CME courses on the ability to prevent conditions, yet alone treat them, which it also is stunning at. In order to understand this plant, particularly when I say plant, I'm always talking about raw vegetable, because that's the only way that we can get to this, 1 to 2 grams a day, which are fully a dietary essential. I mean, every person on the planet needs a couple grams of these cannabinoid acids to enhance their health. And one little plan that was on that Wiser Earth program was we do a carbon swap to raise the money to produce 1 billion pounds of seed and give those to the people on our planet that live on $1 a day. There are 1 billion people that live on $1 a day. So we give them all a pound of cannabis, they put it in the ground, and they've got protein and essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, essential cannabinoid acids, and fiber. So they each grow an acre. It traps 5 times as much CO2 as an acre of forest, so we're trapping 5 billion acres of CO2. And we produce the most healthiest group of people on the planet. And the last become first, and becomes a clinical study, and we can't call it a clinical study because it's a crime, because this drug has no benefits. But it would be an amazing thing to see 1 billion people that suddenly don't have diabetes and heart disease and cancer and arthritis and are doing well. So we have to, if you go to the internet, look up cell types, because the more you know about the divergent cells, the more you know about modulation through the cannabinoid system. And in my mind, the plant just augments the body's regulation, up and down regulation. I mean, it gets more complex. It's true, it does act not only at receptors, but it acts at the channels, as in Gervais, acts at the enzymes. It can cause the cell to destruct through apoptosis, or it can cause the cell to divide, or it can cause the cell to operate faster or slower. So that is a little more complex, but if you just think of it as a brake and gas pedal that facilitates cell function, and this idea of autocrine regulation, most of us have heard of the endocrine system, which regulates the whole body. Well, the autocrine system regulates the cell, and the paracrine, the cell cluster. And if you have a cell that is functioning optimally and its adjacent cells are functioning optimally, you have tissue that are optimal, you have organs that are optimal, you have organisms that are optimal, and you do not have a lot of preventable illnesses. So you look at the cell types, you look at the organ systems. Obviously we've not studied all 210 cell types, but the ones that we have looked at, we're seeing phenomenal things. Whether you're remodeling bone, whether you're firing neurons, whether you're contracting intestines, whether you're part of the immune system. This is a cellular activity that can be overactive, underactive, and the cannabinoid system that just attempts to keep it within a normal bandwidth, and the exogenous cannabinoids come in and augment that process. And for some people that have a deficiency in that system, you've got a single amino acid, a point substitution, and you don't form it as well, or you don't degrade it as well, or you don't bind it as well. So we're now coming up with these genetic cannabinoid systems, and for those people it's like really, really critical, but for the rest of it, it's just critical. So the big thing about the federal patent is the non-psychoactive cannabinoids. It avoids toxicity at high doses. And that's the heart of the raw plant and everything that the people in Mendocino have taught me over the last 6 years. Another part of that patent is the effective oral human dosage range, contemplated to be 1 to 40. 40 milligrams per kilogram is a serious dose. That's probably what you'd be doing if you had a massive heart attack, stroke, head injury, surgery, and you wanted that injured tissue to recover. So, I mean, that's what happens. We'll go back just for a second to the reperfusion injury. You cut off blood supply to the heart, part of the tissue is dead, but there's a very large surrounding tissue that's injured. And the membranes have been damaged. And then when you restore oxygen, you reperfuse it with blood, you bring oxygen in. It has a very severe oxidative assault. And so an antioxidant is very critical for those injured tissues to reassemble their membranes and to decide to recover rather than to go on to die. But this dosing thing, this 20 milligrams per kilogram, I calculated for every one of my patients have for the last 3 or 4 years. And it was actually patients out of time where I heard about this. So we're going to be looking a little bit at dosing, and there's another patent. There are 140 patents. I mean, this is not the basic hardcore science, but it's always hardcore science behind that leads to the patents. And I mean, it's patented for the prevention and treatment of diabetes. It's patented as an anti-inflammatory. It's patented for peripheral neuropathies. It's patented for chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases. It's patented as an antioxidant and neuroprotectant, and 140 more of those. So maybe it does have medical benefit, but I don't know. The folks up in Washington have difficulty reading, I guess. Fine with their own guns, but well, that's another issue. Oh, we get the yellow flashing light. Closing remarks. So here's a dose. This is 25 milligrams. I calculated 20. That's what's in the federal document. I go to court a lot, so I have to defend my patients. I prefer the federal government's own patent to defend them. Northern Lights, 1%. We must remember that that's still 4,000. Many people told me that's not very much. That's 4,540 milligrams a pound. Oranges provide you with 250 milligrams of vitamin C. And very bad quality, quote, cannabis provides you with 4,500. So it's an excellent source at any point, but now that we have plants that are 4, 5, 10, and 20%, that just lowers the amount that we need and allows us to play with balancing. And part of this talk was individualized phytogenetics. This is about calculating dose. We've gone from 60 to 3 grams as we've gone up in concentration. This is another, if you go to cannabisinternational.org, you can get a copy of all these patents. This is the medicinal acidic cannabinoids. It's an important thing. This is that summary. THC acid is a very important molecule, but becomes effective when you're at a half a gram to a gram, as opposed to THC, which is effective at 5 to 10. And mixing those two is very difficult. This is probably the take-home message. You notice that the amount of operator error. You look at the little tiny red bar at the bottom next to the high CBD plant. That is the amount of CBD in cannabis. It's like 0.46. It's not there. It's CBD acid, and that's, thank God, because that's 200 to 400% more effective. So when we heat it, in terms of inflammation, we have a big effect. Though we are trying to do research right now looking at fixed ratios of CBD and CBD acid, because maybe we can do something that we could improve upon this plant, but I'm real reluctant to go there quick because we don't even know what's in it or how it works together. So I'm a little hesitant to be all organic pharmacy about it and say I'm going to fix this by heating it and changing it. We do have a lot of research on CBD. It does, but there's just a paper. The paper just came out. I mean, someone told me about this a minute ago. That CBD acid produces higher level of cannabinoid metabolites in the blood than CBD, and one, it's acidic, so it's going to be more water soluble. It's going to get in the intestine, so you may absorb more of that. I'm very eager to see this paper. It just supports the stuff that we've been doing in Northern California. I was called a peddler of snake oil in the Washington Post, and I take that as a badge of honor. But the snake's getting some teeth. And the teeth that we're getting is that this raw plant is phenomenal. And we're going to have a hard time improving on it. And if you look on the next diagram over, you'll see that 0.25 is the amount of THC is in this plant. Please do not say that cannabis is THC. It's not there. And when it's there, it destroys your ability to benefit from it. So we can enjoy THC. It can distract ourselves from our pain if that's what you want to do. But if you want to get rid of the inflammation and swelling and treat the pathologic process, make sure that you separate the THC use from the THC acid use. And do them both. Do 1,000 milligrams of THC acid, do 10 of THC. That's why all these strains are called ACDC. AC is alternative cannabinoid. That's CBD acid. I changed my card. CBD is in the left pocket, the sinister hand, and CBD acid's in the right pocket. We need to understand the difference between the raw plant and the heated plant, and just give this plant's a vegetable, just stand down and just kind of learn how to put it in your diet comfortably. And I think we'll make and this is about dosing. We notice that there's some biphasic aspects and there are some continuous aspects, and so maybe even a little bit, maybe 100 milligrams of CBD acid, THC acid is good, maybe 500 is good, maybe 1,000 is better for certain conditions, maybe 2. But there appears to be a kind of a continuous beneficial curve that comes out of increasing the dose. We don't really know where there's an upper limit, but I would say that 1,000 milligrams or a gram a day, which is the same as a vitamin C dose, and the federal patent compares those two, is a good starting point. If you want to go conservative, go with the FDA recommended 600 milligrams a day. They recommend 3 times a day. I recommend 5 because of this rapid clearance. El Sole shows that, once you stop smoking, you're about the quarter hour. It clears quickly. So, deer don't sit there and munch limb after limb after limb after limb at 8 o'clock in the morning and call it a day. They nibble. And they change their genetics. They go from one plant that has one ratio, they go to another plant that has another ratio. And these ratios of cannabinoids are very important. One is going to be attending to bone remodeling, one's going to be attending to inflammation, one's going to be attending to autoimmune disorders. And so if you're healthy, eat seeded plants 4 to 5 times a day, different plants. If you're sick, then you switch over to the therapeutic clone and go very intense, if it's a life-threatening situation. Oh, we're into the red. Okay, and here's autoimmune disorders with HCP2. Thank you very much for listening.